Alright, so I'm going to do a quick bit on dynamics and using quick and easy dynamics to drop objects to sort of scatter them around randomly. So the first thing I want to show you guys is how to, I made these like crappy candies, so basically just how to set this stuff up to begin with. So first you want to go to your FX menu, Fields and Solvers, and we're going to look, I use the legacy rigid bodies because the new ones are like really dodgy for me. But you want to go to Create Active Rigid Body for objects that you want moving. In this case, the candy, we are dropping it, so that one would be active. And then something like a ground or a jar, like something that's not moving but it's interacting with the rigid bodies, would be a passive collider. So I'm going to go ahead, set my candy to be active, set my timeline back to 1, and play it, and nothing happens. What you need to do is also assign it some kind of field to affect it. So in this case, we were going to do Fields and Solvers menu again, in Gravity. And now it should theoretically drop, but it's not dropping. So what you want to do, the whole weird thing, you got to select all your rigid bodies and the gravity field itself, go to Fields and Solvers and assign to Selected. At which point it should start falling. Question mark. Why it's not solving, I'm honestly not entirely sure. It'd be great if this just sort of like worked one day. Like, that would be really amazing. So I'm gonna go ahead and just delete that field and try to apply it again, and it's unsurprisingly still not working. So I'm gonna try setting up my rigid body again. If you go to Edit, Delete by Type Rigid Bodies, it should get rid of that rigid body and just make it a existing, or just like a regular object again. So we're going to go to Fields and Solvers, assign Active Rigid Body. Maybe I made that passive by accident? And it's still, once again, not working. Fantastic. Passive, no, that doesn't make any sense. What am I doing? We're going to do Fields and Solvers, assign to Selected. Alright, so theoretically, it's like the gravity field has been connected, and it's still not falling. My goodness. Edit, delete all by type. Rigid bodies. This is a very rigid constraint. That's not what I want. Really, there's no option for, oh, rigid bodies, literally right above. The other way you can check to make sure it's deleted them all is go display, turn off DAG objects only, and then you can search for rigid, and if nothing shows up, you have no rigid bodies in your scene. But this is all the weird back-end stuff that Maya uses. It'll show you also like shaders and other, why do I have IK solvers in here? So you can also see bind poses for skeletons if that ever becomes relevant. But anywho, I'm gonna go Fields and Solvers again, assign an active rigid body, just delete my gravity field, and Fields and Solvers and gravity, and hopefully now it falls. Hooray! So I don't know why. Sometimes like this is kind of buggy. Normally it works fine. It's mostly when I'm trying to demo stuff that it breaks. But you'll notice that the little candy just kind of casually falls through the floor, and that is because we need to tell the ground plane that it should interact by being a passive rigid body. Once we do that, the candy should hit the floor, and it's going to kind of bounce around all crazy. And in this case, I don't care about the animation because I'm not animating this. It was a little bit strangely bouncy, so if you ever need to modify that, you just go into the rigid body, and you can, you know, turn down bounciness a lot. And you can turn on a bunch of other random stuff in here to like sort of make that, you know, animate. Like that feels a little better. But it's a nice way to sort of get stuff overlapping with each other. If you ever need to set up, and I've just sort of duplicated these objects a bunch of times and just dumped them there. So you can make multiple rigid bodies at once. So I'm going to set these all to be active rigid bodies. They're not really doing anything. And that is because, theoretically, I need to assign this gravity field to these objects. So go Fields and Solvers, assign to Selected. It doesn't seem to have thrown any errors, and yes, now it's dropping all of the objects for you. And they're all bouncing around kind of crazy. It looks kind of stupid, but, you know, they're now randomly scattered around the floor. One of the things that I really like this for is, I mean, like I said, scattering objects randomly, like if you're dropping screws, it's very convenient for that. It's also very convenient if you're so inclined as to, like, fill this jar with candy. Doing that manually is a colossal pain. But with this, you can just sort of drop candy into it, and it will just sort of exist where you want it to exist. So to do that, we also need to make the jar a passive rigid body. And theoretically, if we go ahead and play this, it's just going to drop, and it's going to just fill this whole little jar with candies. If we had more candies, the effect would be a little better. I've seen people use this for like filling gumball machines and stuff like that. So for grins, I am actually going to go ahead and duplicate these and just add more candies. The other option is you could build some kind of insane funnel around this. And I'm talking like really weird janky funnel, like great, we have a funnel now. And this is mostly like if your objects are hitting each other or you have like a lot of them and they end up bouncing out of your rigid body or something weird like that, and scattering across the floor, which who knows, maybe that's what you want. If it's not what you want, build yourself a giant funnel like a crazy person and all will be well with the world. So something perhaps like this, and then you can just make this top ring like really, really wide, and that way it should eliminate a lot of the candies like bouncing out of the jar thing. So what we're gonna do is just mesh display, reverse this, and set this to be a passive rigid body. So now we just have a little extra insurance that if we don't want these candies to fall everywhere, they won't. And I should also probably make the rest of these candies rigid bodies here. Duplicate that. This is my extra cylinder, great. So now we have more candies. We should be able to just sort of drop this in. We just need to, once again, go to Fields and Solvers, make these active rigid bodies. Okay. Edit, delete by type, rigid bodies. When you duplicate it, it's going to duplicate the rigid body, but the rigid body isn't really going to be like hooked up. So you have to, sometimes I found it's easier to delete it, make them active rigid bodies again, grab your gravity field again, Fields and Solvers, and assign to selected. It's a little finicky. The actual process is very straightforward. It's just like sometimes you have to beat Maya aggressively until it works. But you can see now we have this little funnel, and it's just sort of systematically filling this jar with little candies, and they look really nice in the way, well, I don't know if they're really nice, but there's not going to be a bunch of clipping with them, and they're going to have a nice sort of randomized feel to them. So this is honestly one of the reasons that I usually use rigid bodies is to fill jars with stuff. If you had gummy bears, if you had screws, if you had gumballs, you could fill a jar with cookies if you wanted to. They're very helpful for that kind of weird thing, and you can see the funnel just makes it a little bit easier to ensure that that is totally filled. But yeah, so I mean this is pretty much our jar filled with random rigid body candies. The other thing that you can do is there's a few ways that you can delete and get a little bit of clipping there. That was mostly just settings I could have probably made better. In my the rigid body itself, you can kind of mess with some of the settings for that. In this case, I'd probably just be a little lazy and just scale up the inside of the jar because shrugs. But once you're done with the objects, what you can do is go in to the rigid solver here, and no wait, I just saw it, sorry, hang on. I've gone crazy. What's happening? Initial settings, no, weird. All right, honestly, usually what I do when I'm happy with my solver, right, because if you change your timeline at all, this is gonna get like really messed up. So a lot of times what I'll do is just grab these objects, I'm gonna group these and just call these candy. And you should be able to just duplicate that, and then once you go back in your timeline, they will stay duplicated, right? So like we have these guys that are still like, what horrors have I perpetrated? Okay, so we have these guys, which are sort of re-simming, but once you duplicate it, it's gonna remove any sim information, and that's usually just how I save this, like once I'm happy with these weird little jar things. Excuse me. So now we have our candies. If you want, you could drop more around, but that's pretty much where I'm going to leave this, because that's probably all you really need to get this sort of set up in a state. There's way more stuff you can do with this, but this is like the simplest way to fill a jar with stuff.